Welcome to an inspirational interview with Dan Fellars on the Share Life podcast. Dan, say hello.
Hello, everyone.
Dan is the founder of OpenSide, which is an expert consulting firm that focuses on how to fully leverage Airtable. And he's also the creator of a community called BuiltOnAir, which is also a podcast, and he's the host. And that's actually how we originally got connected, is he had me on the show early on in that journey, and I was most on one of the most recent episodes on the show again to share some of the ways that I use Airtable. But he's much more advanced than I am, so I'll let him talk about that. Anyway, Dan, thanks for joining us. Tell us about you, your story. How did you end up launching the company? How did you end up with Airtable, and what brings you to where you are today?
Sure. Yeah, good to be here. So Dan Fellars, I currently live in Provo, Utah. Originally, I grew up in Southern California.
Like the
Not
San
too
Diego
far.
area?
Yeah, San Diego
Okay.
area. Vista is the city I grew up in, just a city inland from Oceanside. So traded the beaches for the mountains, and been here in Utah for about 15 years.
Yeah.
It's been
What
good.
originally
Definitely a lot
brought you to
colder.
Utah? Was it school
So I
or
came back.
family, work?
Yeah, school. So I did my
Yeah.
undergrad at BYU, Brigham Young
Yeah.
University. I went back to San Diego. I worked in Carlsbad as a software engineer for about 6 years, and then came
Okay.
back for graduate school for the MBA
Oh,
program. So did
okay.
that, and then I graduated in 2008 from
Okay.
MBA school, and that was a tough year to find work. And
Yeah.
so tried to go back to San Diego, couldn't find anything in the field I was looking at. I did find something here in Utah, so I stayed here.
Okay.
And yeah, I could talk about kind of professionally. I did master's in computer science right out of
Hmm.
undergrad. I did my undergrad in economics. Then I did a master's in computer science. Fell in love with software development. That's
Yeah.
been a huge part of my story, and did
What
that
age did you first get exposed to it? Like, was that something you discovered
to
like in
you
just
know
the computer science type of stuff and coding and engineering and
Yeah, so I'm, a kid of the 90s. I graduated high school in 95. And my dad was always an earlier adopter of technology. Like we were one of the first to get a PC and have a computer in our house. And thinking back, I remember my dad learning HTML in his
yeah.
50s, when it was just coming out. And so he was a dentist, so he wasn't an engineer or anything.
Mm. Was he building his own
And
website? Is that why he was learning it?
yeah, he was doing
Yeah.
that. He was tinkering. He was kind of an entrepreneur on the side, so he was doing a little bit of stuff. So yeah, so I didn't learn it too much in that grade, other than just kind of tinkering. I didn't really learn how to code until college.
Yeah.
It's actually my senior year in college. I was like, what do I do with an econ degree? And they had like a meeting for interest in the computer science department. So I
Mm.
went to that. I was like, maybe I'll try, intro to computer science. So I took the intro class and just fell in love with it, and
Yeah.
was like, this is much a better fit for me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I
That's
kind of
interesting.
switch. I
Is
was I
there
was
is there
thinking
any kind
maybe.
of like synchronicity or harmony between economics and engineering?
Um, Yeah, maybe they're both challenging in their own way. I loved building things, so I loved seeing an output of what I built, be
Mm,
other than a spreadsheet in economics. And so I
yeah.
love that part of like hitting your head against the wall and then finally getting it to compile and then having something to show for your work
Yeah.
and knowing that you did it right because it worked the right way. So I
Yeah.
love that part of software development.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
yeah,
So I
so
guess in
that
a way, then engineering is creating things, and economics is more like understanding what those created things do to people or how they affect people in
yeah,
groups.
yeah, that's fair. That's fair.
Yeah. Yeah. So
Yep.
continue. Yeah. So you go to college, you get your degree and your master's, and then you end up
Yep.
with a job. that keeps you in
Yep.
Utah?
So then I go back down to San Diego, started working for a gaming company actually.
Oh wow,
And
computer games,
I was
consoles.
They were so if you've ever back in the 80s, like early, internet days, the company that was started actually as a game that you play in bars and restaurants. And
Okay.
it was around football games. So it
Ah,
started like you go to the bar and you watch your favorite team playing. You'd play along with the football game and predict if the team was going to pass or throw. And then that would go over the internet to the headquarters of this business. And you'd get scoring, you get points based on if you predicted right or wrong. And so your bar would play against the bar across the town. And so
okay.
that's kind of how it started. And then when I came on, this was, years after it started, I worked on the team that kind of took their games into mobile and cable television. We actually had a
Okay.
cable
So what year
TV
was that?
channel. So that was 2000. So that was right
Okay.
at right in the crash of the internet.
Right before the big, I guess it was right after. When it was was it 1999 when the whole Silicon Valley crash came?
It was like 2001, I think.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, 2000.
So
Yeah.
9/11 and that happened around the same time
Yeah,
then.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I got that job thinking about one of your questions about mentorship. That played a
Mm,
huge role in that company. The guy that hired me, Ron, he took a chance on me. I was a student. I was still working. I was getting my master's degree, but I'd only programmed for maybe 6 months, in college classes. And he kind of took a chance on me and brought me in. And really, it was a startup and felt like it. And so they gave me a lot of responsibility very
yeah.
early on, even when I was working part time. And then about a year into it, so I did a master's degree, and it took me about 2 years. And about a year into it, working there part time, this was when everything crashed, and so
Mm,
they had major layoffs. So they actually
yeah.
laid off Ron as well as several team members. And I just happened, I wasn't there the day that they did all the layoffs because I was at school. And
Okay.
so Ron calls me that afternoon and said, "Hey, don't come in today. We just had a round of layoffs." And he said, "They didn't mention your name, probably because they didn't think of me being just a part time intern." He's like, "So if I were you, if you still want to keep working, then feel free to go in tomorrow." And so I kind of felt bad. But because of that, they're like, "Yeah, you're cheap enough. We can afford to keep you around." And I actually ended up having to consume basically all the work that Ron was
Mm,
doing. So I kind of had to take over,
wow.
his full time job, still working part time. And so that was a huge growing experience for me because I was
Yeah.
still learning how to do my craft. But I look back at those years as a huge benefit to me to really grow as a software engineer and be thrown into the deep end very at a young age.
Yeah, I can relate. I would grew up in Arizona and moved from a small city there called Flagstaff to Atlanta, Georgia in 2005. And I jumped into the into the fiery furnace, so to speak. Very ambitious and creative, but real life and challenges and business and all those types of dynamics are pretty tough when you don't know what you're doing.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So yeah,
So luckily it was a gaming company. Your life didn't depend on it. It might have been
yeah,
down for 10 minutes that you couldn't play your games, but so
yeah.
it was good to learn that way.
Yeah, so I'm also I'm a little, I guess, a little younger because I was born '84, but definitely grew up in the '90s with, like, Windows 3.1, Windows 95, learning how those. I mean, remember playing DOS games and games on the Amiga and things like that. And then as Windows 95 came out, Diablo came out and StarCraft and those types of things. So yeah, fun
Yep.
fun era.
Yeah, these were more casual games. So we had sports games and then
Yeah,
casual gaming. Yep.
yeah.
So
So did you have a desire to get into gaming, or was that just, hey, they were hiring, so I'll go there?
Yeah, that was just pure opportunity. I had met Ron through other ways, and so he said, "Hey, there's an opportunity here," and they're willing to still pay me. So it was a good paying job while I was still in college, and yeah, nothing. Yeah, no, I wasn't.
Yeah.
I'm still not much of a gamer,
Yeah.
or anything
So
like
what's
that.
your,
But
like, with the engineering, you like to build things, like what's kind of the vision that you have that sort of, you have open side, you have built on air, you like Airtable. What's the vision that you have that sort of brings all of those pieces together to kind of explain it?
you know, when I went off on my own, so I worked for other companies for a while, and then I've been on my own about 12 years now.
Yeah.
And usually the vision is around solving my own problems and
Yeah.
solving my own pain points, and
Hmm.
kind of just taking the approach that if I have this challenge and I don't feel like there's a solution out there that does it the way that I want to do it,
Yeah.
then I'll explore, building a product around that.
Okay.
So
And
in my own work, all the stuff that I've done has definitely been more around business tools,
mhm.
automation, things of that nature.
Okay. And how does Airtable come into that picture? And when does it come in?
Yeah, so I went off on my own. So I worked for a company after graduate school. So 2008, the economy was pretty bad. I did find a job in the healthcare space. I actually worked for a healthcare company, and actually had the chance to grow into the CEO role of that company. It was a smallish company doing about 10 million in revenue, and had the chance to grow there, but it was struggling. It was actually a newsletter business that was dying.
Mm,
This was in the early
like
2000s,
an
and
email newsletter or a physical print newsletter?
physical print newsletter.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. In the healthcare, so they would send physical print newsletters to the doctor's offices. It was for the people that worked in the doctor's offices, mostly medical coders, the people
Yeah.
that figure out what your
Yeah.
what insurance code you have to submit, the CPT codes, all that stuff that I knew nothing about, and
Yeah.
yeah, and so they were obviously dying. They had already moved to just being more of a PDF newsletter type business,
Mhm.
for the most part. I
Yeah.
think they still were doing print, but
Yeah. It's
anyway,
funny.
so I,
I was just going to make a comment. I had
yeah,
a client that I started working with in 2020 because of the pandemic. And that was, they were like, when the pandemic hit, they're like, I guess we better figure out this internet thing. And they were a law firm. So, you can imagine they're kind of in that that archaic system. They were printing their
yeah,
newsletters and mailing it to like tens of thousands of people. I said,
yeah,
so we got them onto MailChimp, and we publish them on the website now. And they still do some of the print ones, but we're moving digitally. So, so yeah,
yeah,
2023, and we're finally getting digital.
yeah, 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 for sure.
So,
Yeah,
but
and so
anyway, go
that
on.
was yeah, so that was a good growth experience. I did that for a few years. We ended up merging that with a kind of a sister company within the same family of companies, and then that's when after the merger, I stayed on. They actually laid off a good chunk of the people that came in from the merger, and so I got laid off essentially after that merger, and
Hmm.
so that's when I was, kind of figuring out what did I want to do. I knew I had a skill set of developing applications and software, and so I wanted to kind of explore that. Um, I had worked previously during graduate school for a venture capital firm, and they became my first client when I went on my own and worked with them, kind of on a part-time basis. And so that relationship was enough to give me some stability all the time. My fourth daughter, so I have four children. My fourth
Yeah.
was born like a month after I got laid off,
Oh, wow. And
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 so
what
that
year
was
did you
kind of
get
like,
married?
I got married in 1999.
Okay, so that was,
Yeah,
oh, yeah. So
yeah.
we've got 5 kids, so you're one short.
Okay, okay. That's good. That's good. That's a
Yeah,
lot.
yeah.
Yeah. now they're now they're all in their teen years and older,
Yeah.
so it's a different phase, but
So
yeah,
how do
so
you
that's good.
navigate? Yeah, like, well, definitely want to. I mean, if you
Yeah,
had something else to say, go ahead. But just talking about like living better, and what does that mean, and how does that tie into kind of all these the work side of things that you're doing
with the kids, with 4 kids.
with your kids and your family and just
Yeah,
community and all that.
yeah, yeah, it plays a huge part, obviously. I mean, that's been one of the blessings. Like, I look back on my own thinking, from a financial perspective, I probably could have done much better financially had I continued working. I could have gone back into the venture capital world and had the opportunity to do that. So going on my own, definitely, maybe, at least not yet. The story's not
Yeah.
over yet, but financially over the last, 12 years, I think I could have done better elsewhere. But having my own schedule, not
Hmm.
traveling nearly as much. I haven't traveled. I used to travel a lot more. So being home
Mm,
with the family and really home every day, not missing
yeah.
anything, that, there's a price for that. So that's been a blessing of being on my own and having that freedom to set my own
Yeah.
schedule around the family.
Yeah. That makes
and
sense.
and they help me now. Now I've got my oldest working for us, so that's good.
Wow.
So
So she's
keeping
is
it.
a boy or girl?
Girl, yeah. So
Girl.
she's
Okay.
20, and
Okay.
so she's part-time.
Okay.
She's in
Oh,
college
okay.
and
So
working
she is
for us.
learning the Airtable way.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah,
Yep.
that's exciting. So,
Yep.
on the other side is like there's living better and then there's working smarter. And I think in many ways Airtable is like don't work don't work dumbly, work smart. That'd be like the slogan of Airtable, right? Because it just makes everything so much better, even if you just use it in a basic way. So,
Yep.
but what do you think about when you hear that word working smarter?
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's still a lot of room for improvement in that regard. As far as, definitely systems, automation, like one of the joys that I love of working with clients is hearing them say like how much time this saves them. And
Yeah.
so when we can go in, like, it's very common that we'll go in and set up a process that they were doing manually that could take hours or days to complete, and we can completely automate that process for them. And so that is clearly a way to do your work smarter.
Yeah.
There's so much, and we're just at the beginning, especially with this
Hmm.
whole AI movement of that we're just
Mm,
now, working into our processes. um, that it's going to be exponential, I think, over the next 10 years.
mm. Yeah, because I mean, I'm seeing that already, and in different ways. So, and it's just the tip of the iceberg, as far as I can tell. But it does seem to be moving very, very fast, perhaps too fast, too fast to
Yeah,
kind of really to metabolize it. So,
yeah, for sure.
so
Yeah,
you
so
mentioned,
that's
yeah,
yeah, go ahead.
yeah, go ahead. Well, I was gonna say, so you mentioned, systems and automation. Like when you think about automation, when is it appropriate and when is it actually problematic? How do you discern when it's appropriate use?
I think that usually what we tell people is you need to do it manually first so that like what to actually automate. Sometimes we'll work with clients and they're maybe starting a new initiative and they want to like automate it out of the gate.
Yeah,
And maybe if they know the process, or similar processes, but a lot of times like what you think you want to automate is different than what the actual process is. And so it works better if you've done it manually and like inside and out what the process needs to be, and then you layer on automation on top of that. Sometimes if you jump straight to automation, you're going off of assumptions, and what you
mm,
find out is once you actually start doing those processes or following that system, it isn't what we're actually
Yeah.
trying to accomplish.
So would you say this is kind of one way I think about it is it amplifies, or you think about like a prism, whatever is there, whatever you automate is going to amplify what's there. And so if it's a bad framework or a bad structure, it's going to just make everything worse. If it's a good one, it's going to make everything better. Is that kind of a helpful way to look at it, or
Yeah.
is that too simplistic?
Yeah, no, I agree with that. Yeah, I think that sums it up.
Yeah. So you mentioned earlier also about like mentoring in that one company. How else do you think about mentoring? How does it play a role? I mean, you have this Airtable community called BuiltOnAir. It's sort of a communal mentoring, right? Everyone's sort of mentoring each
Yep.
other in different ways. What have you learned from that? How do you think about that idea?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think mentoring's been, I also mentor a lot at the university at my alma mater.
Mm,
Especially I live in I stayed in the city where it is, so I'm
okay.
close. So I do. I haven't done as much. They kind of changed things the last couple of years, but before the pandemic, every year I was assigned an entrepreneur that was working on something, and we'd help mentor there. And then within this, the BuiltOnAir community, so it's a community of Airtable users. So we have thousands of Airtable users. So there's different layers to it. So there's the community layer that you're a part of. Thank you for joining.
Yeah.
And so everybody is very, very helpful in there. I think um, there's something unique about Airtable. What drew me into it. So I was coming from the venture capital world, and I had looked at a lot of different softwares. Like I
Yeah.
was, assigned to look at tech companies. So I evaluated companies. That's what I did.
Mm,
And so when I found Airtable, there was something that stood out that I hadn't really seen in other communities, which was like the passion of the user base
mm,
was incredible, and like the affection for the product, and then the willingness to help each other. Like there was just this camaraderie amongst the users that a lot of people were coming into it, and it was like their first introduction to databases.
yeah.
And once they launched like the scripting environment, it was their first introduction to coding.
Yeah.
And so like everybody was trying to help each other, and we've been able to capture, to some extent, some of that in the BuiltOnAir community. But then
Yeah.
even deeper than that, there's even a smaller group of Airtable experts, and we have kind of our own private chat, and we do a
Yeah.
monthly call that I help facilitate. And
Yeah.
that's been, like we've developed real friendships in that
That's
group, and
cool.
it's been pretty cool. And we help each
How do you
other.
explain, like you said that there was something about Airtable that was super unique in terms of the community. How do you explain that?
I think like there's a joy that people get in using it. I think you go back to my early days of when I learned how to write code in college. Like Airtable makes it very easy to experience that joy. And so it kind
Yeah.
of lowered the bar. You think about
Mm,
like software development over the years, and the bar just keeps getting lower and lower. ChatGPT even lowered it even more
yeah.
this last year. And so Airtable helped lower that bar for people to experience that joy of, hey, I
Mm,
built this process in here, and I don't
yeah.
know anything about databases. And so I think
Yeah.
people naturally want to share that with others.
Yeah. That's interesting you say that, because I see that as a general trend. Talking about game development, like the tools that are out there to make video games are even getting the bar is getting lower because you can do things without having to be super super technical. Building websites. I mean, I love kind of the way you talk about it is similar to how I feel about Joomla. So I use Joomla. I also work with WordPress sites, but I don't get any joy on those ones. But with Joomla, I get like this deep joy. And I
Interesting.
know a lot of people that use WordPress, but I don't know anyone that's like, wow, I love WordPress. But with Joomla, there's definitely
I've met
that
a
type of
few.
community.
I've met a
Yeah,
few actually probably more with WordPress than Joomla.
yeah,
That's actually surprising for me to hear that
yeah,
that's what you do with Joomla.
yeah.
That's
So,
funny.
and I've been with it since it started almost like 2006 or so. So I've kind of been through
Yeah.
the different stages, and there's obviously been, I think a lot of times, it might be the stage that you're in that whether you get the joy or not. But and how long you've
Yeah.
invested. So,
Right.
so yeah.
Yeah, and that's where Airtable, is it, you know, at some point it'll be the old one that's slow and hard to learn, and it'll be a
Yeah.
new one.
Something that's like, yeah. So, and I think to one degree, that can be a challenge with Airtable. It lowers the bar for people that the bar, like they're thinking the bar is like literally having to code and operate in SQL databases and stuff, right? But for some people that like a blank canvas is overwhelming, Airtable can be overwhelming for them because it is a Lego set and you can build whatever you want. But if you don't know what you want, then it's kind of hard to build it. So I guess, yeah, it's each person. It might vary in where they're coming from and what they care about.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true.
So what about stories and narratives? Like how have real or fictional narratives shaped you as a person? What are some examples of those?
Yeah. Yeah, this was a question I struggled with. I have a terrible memory. Like my
Yeah.
memory, just ask my wife and kids, like I can't remember much about high school and whatnot. So this one I struggled with. Like I'm sure there are, um, but I couldn't come up with a really good one
Yeah.
that
What
was
about a
really
favorite
applicable.
movie or a favorite book that just really you found compelling
Yeah,
or a
that's the thing. I
parable?
mean,
Yeah.
I have movies. I don't know that there's one that like
Sticks
really
out.
resonates.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, I
yeah.
think in
So
a
this,
way there is the one narrative that you did say earlier was you like to build things. And right,
yeah,
building is a narrative. So
yeah,
that's an interesting example.
yeah, for sure. I think definitely, personal experiences definitely have shaped me. And but yeah, I'm sure there are some. Like the last week I've been trying to rack my
Yeah.
brain, and this is where my memory is failing me of good ones that would be
Yeah, yeah.
story worthy. But yeah,
Well,
probably more on the personal experience side.
yeah. Well, I imagine then you'll probably have a lot more to say on the system side of things. So how do you define a system? What does it mean to you? How do you think about it? How do, obviously that has a role in your work. Does it have a role in your personal life as well?
Yeah, I think having a framework. I think a lot about frameworks, and trying to apply them to business and personal life and outside of work. And I think that one of the strengths that I've had, I think back of like the skill sets that I was born with or developed over time. One is being able to see like multiple frameworks. Like I think some people just have a natural operating system of how they operate, and they can't break out of that.
Yeah.
One thing that I've always been able to do, maybe it's because I'm one of eight
Oh,
children,
okay.
so there's
Wow.
eight in my family, and
Yeah.
I'm towards the end. I'm the sixth,
Mhm.
and so one of my strengths is the ability to adapt and
Yeah.
just kind of go with the flow of what's going on. And so I think about that in frameworks, and being able to modify my operating system or my mode depending on what the situation is,
Okay.
and thinking about so my overall arching framework is probably revolves around flexibility and
Mm,
adapting, and not getting too caught up in having to do things a certain way.
mm.
And so that's one of the
What
good
happens
things.
when you do it when you try to do it a certain way instead of being flexible? Like, what's the downside of that you've experienced?
I think not evolving, not adapting when a roadblock comes in, and I think there are some things that you shouldn't. So maybe just knowing when you stick with something, and what is kind of long term, and what can be changed, and isn't as important to the bigger picture. So maybe understanding the bigger picture, of what's important versus not getting too caught up in the weeds of focusing on the smaller things.
Yeah.
Um, Yeah. So along those lines,
When does a
but yeah, as far as,
system,
yeah.
I was gonna say, when does a system become tyrannical?
Um, you know, as far in a business sense, yeah, I think when you're not receiving input, so when you're not listening to the feedback or
Mm,
the data, to make changes, and if somebody, we see that with businesses, somebody higher up has something set and isn't willing to adapt or change or listen to alternative
mm.
approaches, they might have, kind of be more stuck in a certain way of doing things.
Is that almost
Um,
like the outputs become the input? In other words, it's just like this
yeah,
self-repeating cycle. Yeah.
yeah, 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 for sure. So yeah, I think adaptability frameworks, and then just kind of be willing to learn new frameworks. That's one good thing about in the technology world, is it moves so fast. You've got to be able to adapt. I think back on my career, learning different languages, there's
Hmm.
always new languages coming out. Although it's getting harder and harder, the older you get, it is harder to I used to be more up to speed on the more current technologies and
Yeah.
frameworks. um,
Is that just a
but
matter of like you got to put in the time and to make it to keep it useful, or is it there are just so many new languages coming out that it's hard to keep up?
yeah, I think when you have something, when you're in maintenance mode, so I'm probably more in maintenance mode with my business. I mean, I'm still in
Mm,
growth mode, but I have an existing product. And so I should probably clarify like what all I do. And so there's
yeah,
kind
go
of
ahead.
three things that I'm involved in. So one you mentioned, so OpenSite is actually kind of more of a legacy brand of mine. So our consulting business is actually under a different name, so it's called InAir Studio.
Yeah.
And that's actually a business that I started with a business partner, Sergio, about a year and a half ago. And so InAir Studio is focused entirely around Airtable consulting and has a team of about 20 people. So that's probably the biggest thing that I've
And when
got
did
going
that?
on.
What year did that start?
Yeah, that started end of 21. So
Okay.
a year and a half ago.
Yeah. So
Um,
that kind of really sounds like that ramped things up for you in terms of what you were doing before with the open side.
Yeah. Yeah. So
Yeah.
OpenSide was kind of my personal consulting business. Sergio, my partner, he had his own. We actually had worked together on projects. We worked on a couple of projects together, and then I was down in. He's based in Mexico City. I was down in Mexico City for a conference, and we just started talking every day. We go to dinner after the conference, and by the end of the week, we decided to join forces and create a new business and kind of merge our consulting businesses into one.
Yeah.
And so that was a good decision. That's been very good for us.
Yeah. So how does is in air like what's the vision you have there for that business and its future and for the clients that you work with?
Yeah. So InAir will continue to kind of focus in kind of this no code space. Airtable is our primary. We'll branch out to others. We're talking to one or two other platforms that we might support.
Yeah.
But there's bigger initiatives to grow beyond the consulting and creating more product type services
Hmm.
and training products. We have some plans. So InAir is kind of the entity also behind BuiltOnAir. So there is a separation right now between the two, but InAir is kind of the financial entity that
Yeah.
supports the BuiltOnAir community.
Yeah, that makes
And
sense.
yeah, and we'll see more. We're going to invest more into the BuiltOnAir community and try to grow that. And
Yeah.
do more around video production, like the podcast that we do. We'll do more around that, maybe different types of shows, creating kind of a production studio that might
Yeah.
support outside clients and be a, be its own standalone business. So I
Yeah, that's
see this
exciting.
as we now have a team of automation experts. And so, in addition to helping other companies, I could see us launching our own automation service type businesses within it and kind of being a launching pad for other services
Yeah.
that we might offer.
Yeah, that's cool.
So that's the long
And
term.
is Yeah, so you said, explaining what you do, does that cover it, or are there any other hidden pieces
Yeah,
which
so
to
we
bring out?
got
Yeah.
that. We've got the community that we just talked about, BuiltOnAir, and then there's actually a software piece to it called OnToAir. So
Okay.
OnToAir are pure software apps built on top of Airtable. So
Okay.
everything revolves around Airtable. All three things. There's a lot of synergy amongst them. But OnToAir are apps and extensions for the Airtable ecosystem. And
Mm,
so we have a thing like a form builder. So if you need to collect data and get it into Airtable, or update existing data in Airtable, our form builder is really powerful. We have a backup solution to back up your data outside of Airtable and
yeah, that's
other
that's you
apps
were
like that.
showing. I saw the backup, so that's cool.
Yep.
So I imagine you have a vision for apps, and essentially it's to fill in the gaps where there are things you'd like that Airtable doesn't do natively.
Yeah. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
a challenge. Yeah, I mean, talking about that, one of the biggest challenges is we're so tied to Airtable that, our success is dependent on Airtables.
Yeah.
That's across the board, but especially on the software side, because it's already happened like 4 or 5 times where we have an app or a feature in our app that doesn't exist, but then Airtable comes out and builds it
Mm,
into their core product. And so obviously anybody that was paying us or was considering paying us, but now gets it as part of their Airtable
mm.
subscription, then
So
that
it's a
that
double-edged sword.
is by far, yeah, it's the biggest risk of that business by far.
Yeah, so you almost have to go into it knowing that anything you create could be integrated natively, right?
Yep. Yep.
Yeah,
So it's trying to play in the spaces that they aren't willing to go into.
yeah, the harder ones.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah. So what
So
what
yeah,
else? Yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna say we were talking about, so that kind of gives you a summary of the different types of things that got going on, and and so that plays into the frameworks, trying to grow those, and really the biggest thing that I've learned from those is, especially on the consulting side, is trusting other people. Like that's been a challenge for me, is finding partners that I can trust and to partner on in business. I've tried it many times over. I've been on my own for 12 years, but I've tried multiple times to bring on a partner that could complement my skill set, and it hasn't worked until now. And so with
Yeah,
Sergio, my partner on the consulting side, it's been fun to have somebody
yeah. So I
that I
imagine you
trust.
guys were kind of collaborating a lot, and then finally you're like, man, it just makes sense that we start a company
Yeah,
together. Is that how it went?
yeah,
Yeah,
yep, yep,
yeah.
yep.
That's cool. I mean, what have you
So
learned? Just because you've been on your own and then you had a partner, like obviously there's pros and cons, trade offs for both sides. But what are some of the things you learned in that contrast?
yeah, just how much more you can get done with more people.
Yeah,
I've always trusted my own skill sets and what I can do. And I've always had like contractors that have helped me, or employees. I've
yeah,
had employees in the past, and but really having somebody at the partner level, it's a game changer as far as being able to build and collaborate and work together with somebody where you're aligned on the vision of the business.
yeah,
That's been huge for me. Yeah.
yeah. That's cool. What other bits of wisdom do you have to share with us that you haven't gotten a chance to?
Yeah, I mean, kind of we touched a little bit on family, like that's a huge part, trying to trying to be a good dad and start your own business and try to juggle all those hats. I'm also very involved in my church and things, and so that struggle of trying to find balance is a
Yeah.
constant battle. I don't know that I do it well, but I'm grateful to have a wife that helps me and knows when to allow me to focus on work or focus on family and kind of keep me aligned there. And but
What would
that
you give?
struggle
What
is,
advice would you give to someone who's like newly married? Maybe they're having their first kid and they're facing that challenge. What would be the advice you give them?
yeah. It's easier now, even 12 years ago. Just the way things are done now is so different than even then. I think it's easier to um, I think it is easier to manage those things. I think there is more of an environment of, intermixing work and home life to some degree, but also, setting boundaries. I would say, make sure that it's a joint effort, not necessarily like my wife doesn't work in the business, but she's very involved in
Yeah. She's committed.
brainstorming and
Yeah.
yeah, and seeing me succeed and being there to bounce ideas off of. She's kind of my sounding board. So that's huge, to make sure that both are on board with what's involved there.
Yeah. And what's your advice for so now you said your daughter's starting to work part-time. That's another thing is like working with family can be a blessing and a curse, depending on the dynamics
Yeah.
and clarity and all that. Any advice like that you sort of are exploring just on how to make that a positive experience from the get-go and going
Yeah.
forward?
Yeah, I purposely this go around. So she actually used to work for me a couple years ago. She took some time off to actually serve a mission for our
Yeah.
church, and so before that, she actually worked directly with me. This was before we started the consulting business, and so in that scenario, I was her boss. This time around, she actually reports to somebody else, and that was by design, so that
Mm,
she got an experience working, with
yeah.
a different team and not just working for me.
Yeah.
And so that's been really good because she
Well,
feels, she can't um, she'll more easily say no to me than she would to somebody else, and so
yeah.
so that's helpful that she can have that experience
Yeah. Creating the
and I don't.
separation, but yeah.
Right. Yep. Yep. And so it's a good, and this part time just while she's in school. So,
Yeah.
yeah, that's worked out well.
Anything else you wanted to share? Any insights, wisdom,
Yeah. The
stories?
other, the other thing, and this is again my a blessing of my wife. So she works. So I'm not a huge fitness guy, but I do exercise every morning,
Yeah.
and mainly because that's what my wife does. She teaches exercise classes in the
Okay.
morning at our local rec center. And
Okay.
so I go to all of her classes 6 a.m. every morning. And
Wow.
that's been a huge blessing to me to force me to kind of go and have that incentive.
Yeah.
But I view that as part of my job is to exercise, just to combat, I sit or stand or whatever, like just being sedentary for so long. I think
Mm,
that getting any kind of movement should be viewed as a part of your job.
yeah. That's a good point.
And yeah, and so that's a big part of what I do every day. So yeah, some form of exercise. I think you should just consider that is part of your job description.
Yeah. And I guess the earlier we start that habit, the better, right?
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
So, if people are interested in connecting with you, how can they find you? What are the websites to these different places you've mentioned? InAir, Built on Air.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot. So openside.com lists kind of all the stuff that I've got going on. Although I don't think I even have my consulting. That thing is moves so fast.
Yeah.
But yeah, Built on Air. If you want to join the community, builtonair.com/join. It's free to join. And that will get you in with other people of all stages of learning or knowing Airtable. Ontoair.com is our website. I'm not super, I'll post on social media through our company brands. I don't personally, I'm not too involved in social media. I actually made
Okay.
my first Facebook post last night in like 15
A long time.
years to, yeah, I don't know how long my last one was, but I posted last night to help my son. He's raising money to go to a national competition. So I had to get the
Oh,
word
okay.
out with that. So, but
Now,
yeah, so
I
probably,
assume, so
probably
I
built
assume
on
it,
air.
yeah, I assume if they want to connect with you, maybe LinkedIn would privately,
Yep.
personally, and then otherwise they can kind of interact with the brands and the websites. Who, if
Yep.
if who would be a good fit for, if they're interested in working with InAir, or who's a good fit to join the community?
Yeah. If you have any interest, if you're using Airtable in any capacity or you want to learn it, you can join. As far as in air, we work with, we're probably positioned mid to enterprise market as far as that company. So if you work at a company of any size exploring Airtable, feel free to reach out and we can hook you up. And so
What are some
yeah,
of the
so
types
that
of problems that, let's say they are using Airtable or want to, like, what are some of the challenges they might face where like, oh, you're a good fit for them?
yeah. Yeah, anything from if you have a lot of systems that you need to integrate. Our team is heavily engineer focused or oriented. Most of the team members are engineers, and so we do a lot of integrating Airtable with Salesforce or NetSuite or whatever system of record that you have. So on the enterprise side, that's a lot of what we do is making Airtable play nice with other systems, in addition to building out your workflows, automating your workflows. So any process, if you're using a spreadsheet, which is still the go-to tool for most businesses, that can likely get translated over into Airtable and work more seamlessly than a
Yeah,
spreadsheet.
and I give him the double thumbs up on that comment. So,
Yep. Yep.
um, so what, anything, any other, so anything else you want to throw out there, or is that pretty much cover it for, you got
Yeah,
the
that's kind of
podcast. So
it.
if anyone wants to check it out, that would be more of a learning kind of program about Airtable and what's new and things you can do and advanced techniques, right? Hmm.
Yep. Yeah, and that's live. So that's a live show, as you know. You came on
Yeah.
2 weeks ago, and we just do it live Tuesday morning, 11 a.m. Eastern. So you can watch it live or watch the replay.
Yeah.
And
What
we
what
always
have you
have guests
discovered
on.
by going live? Because when I did the first episode, it was recorded. So this one,
Yeah.
the second one was live. So what have you learned about that shift? Do you get more engagement, or what was the reason you did that?
Yeah. Part of it was the engagement, part of it was forcing the habit of doing it
Mm,
and just knowing that we've already announced that it's going to be next Tuesday at
yeah.
11 a.m. And so it just forced the behavior.
Okay.
And then it also like um made it easier to I came up with a framework, going back to frameworks. If you
Yeah.
watch our show, I have a very specific framework, but there's flexibility in there. So frameworks that provide some structure but also flexibility. That's kind of key to how we do things. So our show, I kind of view it as like a variety show, like the Tonight Show or something, where they have
Yeah.
different skits and you don't know what skit they're going to do that night, but they kind of have a library of skits that they might pull from.
Hmm. Yeah.
And so that's kind of the feel. I have kind of this library of different types of segments that we're going to do each show,
Yeah.
and we can pull from that library And so we always do 4 different segments. One of them we do every week, but then the other 3, it just depends on what we can put together that week.
Okay.
And
Yeah,
so
that's
that
interesting because
framework has worked well for
yeah,
us.
you're integrating the traditional media approach and new media, right? You're kind of pulling in some of those elements because frameworks are pretty common
Yep.
in production. But part of it is like traditional media. When you're spending as much money as you do to like produce a show, like a Tonight Show or something, you better have some structure. Whereas with new media, you can kind of do whatever you want, and so sometimes that structure is just not there because it's not forced upon them
Yeah.
for practical reasons. But that's cool that you kind of figured out a way to merge the two.
Yeah. Yeah, that is
Yeah,
true.
cool. Well, thank you
Yeah,
so much
so
for
check us
sharing.
out,
Yeah,
subscribe. Yep. Yeah, nice to be
I'll
on
put
with you.
yeah I'll put the links on the show notes, and then people can check those out and learn more and hopefully join the community. So thank you so much for sharing.
All right, appreciate it.